In the last video I recorded, I took this engine apart and I talked about the fact that we're turning this into a 2.7 stroker. So I wanted to go over the parts that you need to order because I found it kind of confusing and I want to make it clear for everyone else that wants to replicate this. To start, technically speaking, the only gasket you need to replace is the head gasket. However, if you're anything like me, I went ahead and just bought the whole reseal kit. I'll put the part number here. Now, the next thing I want to talk about that's different are the pistons. So, longer stroke with the same connecting rods, you have to have a different piston. So this is a 2AR piston. It's very used. This is a 1AR piston. This is also used. The difference between them is the deck, or the compression height. So if you see if I put them at the same height, the 1AR piston is shorter. Because for the same stroke, or for a longer stroke with the same connecting rod, it pushes the piston further up, so that compression height has to be smaller. When it comes to ordering pistons, there's not just one piston you have to order, it's a tolerance based on part of the connecting rod. So there's 3 marks. In this case, this one's A, this one's B. And that has to do with the tolerance of this hole on the connecting rod. So it says A on the piston, or it's B on the piston in this case. And it also says B right here on the connecting rod. And that has to do with the bore of that hole on the con rod. So in this case, I need to replace this piston with a B 1AR piston. You have to, of course, check that for each cylinder. In my case, they were all Bs. And of course, with new pistons, if you get new piston rings, this is a set of 4, you only need to order one of them. And the next thing, while I have the piston and con rod in my hand, are the rod bearings. And that is a mark here, next to the B, so this one, in this case, is a 2. So I need to order mark 2 connecting rods, and there's 3 marks for those. Now, I'm going to flip the block over and we'll talk about the crankshaft. So this is a 1AR crankshaft. This is as you get it from the dealer, with one minor change. The balance shaft gear on my crankshaft was damaged in shipping, so I actually removed it. So unfortunately the teeth got a little marred in shipping, so I air hammered it off and had the crank rebalanced just to make sure everything was straight. I won't be running a balance shaft on this motor, which is unfortunate because I actually wanted to. I don't think it'll be an issue. I don't think it's a failure point to run with or without one. It is slightly less rotating mass from removing this, which is unfortunate with my use case. For reference, this is how they're normally installed, right there. Now with this, once we have the crankshaft, we unfortunately need the crankshaft before we can order bearings because these are tolerance items. There's numbers here on the crank, and there's numbers here on the block, and we need to take note of those in order to figure out what bearings we need for each position. So if you find the Toyota service manual, it shows you these 2 items. This shows you where they are on the crank and then where they are on the block. Unfortunately, these are actually backwards. So if I note here, this shows that it's at the bottom of the crankshaft and marked this way, and this one's actually on the top of the crankshaft marked the other direction. Same with the block, they are stamped upside down to the way you need to read them. So in my case, vertically this is stamped 4333, but it actually needs to be read upside down, so 33344. If you look at my crank here, you'll notice this backwards, so 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So mine's 1, 1, 2, 2, 1. So we take those 2 numbers, 3, 3, 3, 4, 4, and we go 1, 1, 2, 2, 1. If you add those 2 numbers together, we get 4, 4, 5, 6, and 5. Now once we have those numbers, that's the position, or that's the tolerance for each position on the crankshaft. So in the case of here, so 4, 4, once you add the 2 together, you get that mark, and that determines what bearing you need to use. So in the case of this, 4 is 3 to 5, requires bearing 2. 4 does as well. 5 is also the same. 6 requires bearing number 3, and 5 again requires bearing 2. So in my case, the bearings are 2, 2, 2, 3, and 2. Which, interestingly enough, is the exact same bearings that came out of this engine when it was installed in the car. The old crankshaft has the exact same tolerances. That being said, I am still ordering new bearings, despite me technically being able to reuse these. Now, one thing that's kind of hard to understand that Toyota really doesn't talk about anywhere is after a certain year, the crankshaft design changed, and we actually need to order different bearings in different positions based on that. The way you tell them apart is, here's my old 2AR crankshaft, and if you notice, there's an oil hole here. There's one on main bearing number 3 and main bearing number 5. In this case, of the new crankshafts, they only have oil holes on positions 2 and 5, or 2 and 4, my bad. So positions 1, 3, and 5 don't have oiling holes. So it's also not just a matter of ordering different bearings on positions 1, 3, and 5. They're different on the top and bottom. This is, in my opinion, the most confusing part of ordering all these parts. But I have it all figured out, so I'll lay it out for you here. So on the left here is the diagram for the crankshaft and piston from a 2AR FXE, and despite that being a different engine, that's actually what we need. So we only need to pay attention to the part circled in red here, which is the main bearings, and notably the 3 that are circled in red are the newer style updated bearing. So if you had the older style crankshaft with the additional oiling holes, you would only use the number 1 part numbers. However, since me or anyone doing this build in the future will have to use the updated part numbers, as you can see, main bearing number 3, the upper position is different, as well as mains 1 and 5 on the lower position. So in this case, what I mean by upper and lower is that upper is in the block and lower is on the bearing cap. So on the top right are part numbers, and you use those in conjunction with the numbers that we just found earlier to order the correct parts. And on the bottom right are the parts that I ended up having to order for my setup. Now, one thing everyone freaks out about with modern engines are head bolts, because a lot of them, such as these, are torque to yield. That doesn't mean they aren't reusable. There is a spec for them in order to be reused. So it's looking through the manual. This is a head bolt. You have to measure it at 106 millimeters out from the base of the head, and that has to measure above 10.6 millimeters. So basically, we get this head bolt, slide the washer down a little bit, don't need to remove it entirely. Here are your calipers at 106 millimeters out, which is basically where that the thread looks different around that point. That's basically where that starts, is at 106 millimeters. So just measure these at that point. And in my case, 10.8. I measured all of them, and mine are all reusable. Now, on a similar note, we need to check the main bearing bolts and the rod bearing bolts. I'll start with the main bearing, because I have it in my hand here. And in this case, we're doing a similar thing. We are measuring at 58.5 millimeters out, and it needs to be above 9.1 millimeters. So go 58.5 millimeters out. Right here. In this case, I'm at 9.7, so well above that 9.1 minimum diameter. Last but not least, with the conrod bolt, we're actually not measuring threads this time. We're measuring the tension part of the middle, and this needs to be above 8.3 millimeters. In my case, 8.4, and I checked all of them between 8.4 and 8.5, so I'm good there. So hopefully that helps. You should be able to order everything you need to build another 1AR. I would love to see more people replicate this kind of thing. Just decided I should make it easier for everyone in that case. So stay tuned. Next video should be reassembling the engine completely. And then I'll start working on the car.